let's talk about Over the Garden Wall and what my theory of what the show is about. Now, we've all heard the theory of Greg and Wart and this all just being their journey between life and death. But what if I was to tell you that I believe this whole story revolves around this final scene of the show right here? See, I don't believe that this show is about Wart and Greg, but I believe the show is about Greg and his decision to steal that rock from Old Lady Daniels. Greg is having his young life flash before his eyes, and he is reliving the night that he lost his innocence, with each episode up until episode 9 reflecting some aspect of that night. Let's go through this, but first, let's look at Wart and his reaction when he first wakes up from the hospital.
Wart, you okay? Can you see me, Wart?
Where am I?
Hospital.
A hospital? Greg, where's Greg?
He seems more confused than anything, and of course rightfully so, but more than anything, he seems to have no recollection of what Greg seems to be talking about. At least though, when he's waking up out of this hospital bed, he seems to be concerned about Greg, so at least he's learned something from this whole ordeal and how much he cares about his stepbrother. But this story is about Greg and him reliving his night of innocence lost and the guilt he felt for stealing the rock. So let's relive it with him and go back to episode 9 and see how he was reliving these moments after he hit that ice cold lake. And what happens in the first episode? The woodsman appears, which means Greg is sitting there remembering exactly what Jason Thunderburger said, and then the woodsman appeared with an axe.
So then, a guy with an axe showed up.
Everybody loves Thunderburger.
And that's our very first episode. But on to the next episode, and episode 2, I was actually having a little bit of trouble at first up until this scene.
I can't. I wasn't invited to this party.
I'll go in.
You weren't invited either.
Oh.
Yeah, man, there's lots of bat and ball games besides baseball. One old cat, two old cat, two ball, round ball.
Okay, folks, sorry for the interruption, but Future Billy here, and during the recording of this, for some reason, I completely and utterly forgot to mention a very, very key aspect to this scene, and that key aspect of this scene is the simple fact that as Greg is running into that door, there's pumpkins all around him, as well as a cat silhouette in the window frame there. And if we go back and visit Pottsville, then we obviously understand why this is a key aspect to that scene. So now that I'm done rambling on about that, I'm going to send y'all back over to past me. And then it clicked in my head that they weren't invited to the party, just like they weren't invited to Pottsfield. And in both places, they could have ended up staying if they wanted. Then in episode 4 is where Greg and Wart get to the tavern, and the tavern keeper asks, "Who are you?" Just like when Kathleen asked Greg, "What are you?" and also what Wart was.
What are you supposed to be? It's an elephant costume. Woo! Woo! See my trunk?
Yeah, that's cute. I'm an egg. Yeah, everybody knows you're an egg, Rondi. Shut it, Kathleen. Whatever.
So what are you, Wart?
That's great, but who are you?
I'm Wart. I'm just a guy, I guess. What do you mean?
Well, he's the butcher,
I'm the butcher.
the baker, the midwife, the apprentice, the tailor, and I'm the tavern keeper. Who are you?
And just like at the football game, it ended up being about a girl, Sarah/Adelaide. Granted, Adelaide isn't exactly the kind of girl he was interested in, but the tavern people didn't know that. And I'm sure episode 5 is pretty self-explanatory, with Quincy's gravestone being in the graveyard. But also during episode 5, keep in mind that while Greg and Wart were standing behind Quincy's gravestone, there was also the fact that Jason Thunderburger and the rest of the kids were telling ghost stories. As well as Greg still having it fresh in his mind that he just stole a rock, which is his self-conscious coming through the horse, with all that talk about stealing, and how he'll never steal again. In episode 6, Lullaby in Frogland, this is kind of twofold. there was tons of talk from Greg wanting to go on a frog hunt with Wart, so lo and behold, they're on a boat full of frogs. And also in that same episode, Greg and Wart end up joining the frog band. Now in episode 8, this is where I think Greg is getting delirious, and when he went up there with the cloud people and all that stuff is where he just plain out started going delirious with the cold ice and whatnot like that, and he just ended up hallucinating. And then of course episode 9 was the flashback episode, so that was pretty self-explanatory as well. And then we have episode 10. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, well, Greg wasn't really in that episode much, and there's also the Beast right there, so he hasn't passed yet. And I believe right here, as well as every other scene that Greg isn't in, that this is what Greg's interpretation of everything that goes on, what those people would have done. Through the eyes of a young boy as young as Greg, he has quite an imagination, and I think he believes this is how things would have went down in his head in episode 10, as his older brother, granted yes, a stepbrother, but a brother nonetheless, stands up for him against the Beast and takes him home. Granted yes, they ended up in the hospital, but still, ends up saving his life nonetheless. Now, if you made it this far in this theory video, you're probably thinking to yourself, there's a few holes in this theory, and if I'm being honest with you, there is a few holes, such as episode 3 and episode 7. I honestly could not figure out what those episodes Greg would be reliving from the night that he stole that rock from Old Lady Daniels. But I think my theory holds true nonetheless, with Greg felt really guilty about stealing that rock from Old Lady Daniels, which is why the ending scene of this show was him putting back that rock. That was the very, very, very final scene of this entire show, and I believe that's what it revolves around. Greg losing his innocence and feeling guilty that one of the last things he might have possibly done with his life was steal from an old lady. And you know what? I think I already answered it, but I'm going to go ahead and answer this again. What about the scenes that Greg isn't in? Well, for me, in my own head, I think that the scenes that Greg wasn't in, what we saw was what he believed happens while he is not there. And I know that seems like a pretty easy out for me, but that's just what I believe. And y'all know what? That's my theory on Over the Garden Wall. Granted, I've got a few things to work out, but maybe we can talk about it in the comment section and work it out together. So, y'all know what to do. Hit that comment section up. Let me know what y'all think of this theory. Granted, my Steven Universe theory about White Pearl is controlling White Diamond did not come to pass, but it was a fun theory to think about anyway, just like this one. Theories are funner than the actual show itself sometimes, and if it turns out to be false, well, you know what? I like it nonetheless, and it might just happen to be my headcanon. So, with all that said, y'all know what to do. Hit the comments up. I'll be down there. Hit the like button. Tickle to subscribe. And until next time, as Mr. Rogers always says,
and I like you as you are.